So one thing that I noticed this year fishing for lake trout is it's very, very hard to find a decent jig for vertical jigging, especially when you're ice fishing. So typically I don't like to use the tin ones because they just don't have the weight. Not to mention a lot of them come with really, really thin gauge wire hooks, can be unreliable. Um, I do like the bend it fishing baits because they have the nice little hook for the plastics. But again, sometimes smaller profile is what they want, and a lot of trout can see these bigger hooks. So I took it upon myself with a little bit of fly fishing knowledge and having the fly tying stuff already accessible and available to me. I think I think that it just kind of makes sense for my situation. Not necessarily if you're just trying to save money. Definitely go out and do your research. Buy a jig. It's a lot more cost effective. You can get two of them for literally like $7. I think this jig that I tied up is roughly a little bit more, like $8 or $9 per jig. So definitely not cost effective if you're not into fly fishing and have all the fly tying amenities and stuff to kind of get going. But what I found is you can get these little uh, jig hooks for fly tying, and I'll show you the brand that I'm using. These are Fulling Mill. These are size 12, but the one that I just showed you is a size 10. They're Fulling Mill Jig Force Black Nickel, and they're quite pricey for about 50 of them. 25 of them is pretty average price. Depends on where you shop. So a lot of like local fly angler stores, stuff like that, are going to be carrying them. You might be able to find some decent ones at places like Bass Pro, but again, always double check that hook and make sure that the gauge of the wire is going to be strong enough, especially if you're trying to go for lake trout. But deadly for also other variants of trout like rainbows or even salmonids, like we have Atlantic landlocked salmon. So definitely was a huge move in the right direction as far as my hookup ratios this year. Literally all I did was I took a tungsten drop shot weight that, as you can see, has that little wire grabber on the top of it. So I thread that over the hook, and then I have a tie down spot. And usually you want to have a decent tie down spot. These come pre-cut, so they're actually perfect length, especially for having a nice wide profile in one particular spot. It kind of acts like that hook for grabbing your plastic and keeping it on there. I've rarely been pantsed with my soft plastics on these. I guess it also will depend on how you tie them. I like to use 140 denier to cover that wire up and really get a nice firm grip on that weight to really hold it on there. As you can see, that's the quarter ounce there. But as you can see, it holds onto the plastics just nice. That small, slim profile is perfect. Still has a wide enough hook gap I can get into a lake trout's mouth, no problem. And if I can, I'll try to add some photos in the end of this and show you some of my hookups that I had. I mean, on the chase, they're all right in the beak. It's perfect. But again, different size hooks are going to matter for obviously the size of baits that you're using. Like this is a 3-inch, it's like 275. And then obviously, for like your standard grubs and stuff like that, I would just stick with a normal traditional tungsten, just depending on what they're hitting, and try to keep it close to something that you would buy. Don't go like excessive and go put like 3 ounces on, a size 3/0 hook. It just doesn't look right to them. I'm gonna pull this bait off of this hook and show you. This is probably the closest thing that I found to, as opposed to like the broader profiles. This is about the closest that I've found for accessibility. stuff that you can just buy out of the store. So this is a tungsten, I believe, quarter ounce. Yeah, 7.2 grams. Pretty decent as far as like hook gauge and size overall. I can put a nice 3-inch bait on this, and it's very, very, very small profile, which is what I want. Like I said, trout can be finicky, but I also de-haired a little buck jig, a little bucktail bottom vertical jig that you can buy out of any store. Like I said, if you don't want to tear apart hooks and you don't have the means to tie them, just buy them. But this worked perfect for this 6-inch bait that I had. That obviously you can see I've had to downsize a couple of times just depending on what they're hitting. So it really all depends on, the profile of your bait. How big your bait is depends on what size hook you're looking for. But like I said, I get away with these size 10s, no problem. I can put a 2-inch bait on there. For example, these 2-inch Bendit baits, the little Bendit Smelt Super Glows, that he sells them in a Winnie kit. Definitely, you can find them on benditfishing.com. The guy guides out of New Hampshire here, so go and support him. Definitely check out his channel. He's got a lot of cool stuff on lake trout. He definitely helped me get on a lot more lake trout just by listening to what he had to say and taking some of his advice, also trying out some of his jigs. His jigs do work. Another one that I've actually had really, really good success on is these. Big D's Baits. He's out of New Hampshire as well, locally sourced. They're cheap. They're like $5 for a pack of, I believe it's 8 in a pack. You get 10 in a pack for about the same price with Bendit. Pretty reasonable pricing as far as soft plastics. It's kind of what made me take this on. These weights themselves are about, it varies on the weight. I got 2 half ounces for about $12-13. But these little quarter ounces, you can get them 2 for $6, $7, minus state tax, because we don't have state tax here. But yeah, and a lot of people have been turning over to the 7mm tungstens, the little drop tungstens. But again, you look at the profile of this is very, very, very small. You will hook up on lake trout on this, but again, it all depends on that hook gauge. See, this one here is it's not very, very thick, if I can even get it to focus. It's not very thick at all. It's very, very small. It's more for like panfish, but I've almost bent this out. So pay attention to your hook gauges, quality over price, really. So yeah, I think this kind of sums it up, but definitely give it a try if it's something that you haven't used before, and say, you're getting a lot of chases, but you're not getting a lot of hookups. Sometimes it's that profile, because trout are finicky like that. I've learned just from a few years of fly fishing that literally your presentation matters very, very, very much, especially when they're really, really dialed in and they've been hooked all year. Everybody's throwing every kind of bait that you can possibly get. So it is nice to kind of have the versatility of tying your own stuff and kind of getting away from that. Comes with a lot of research. You definitely want to be able to, look around, shop around, try everything that everybody else has put out there first. And then, if it's still not your cup of tea or your forte, definitely give it a shot for, uniqueness. But again, you can kind of do the same thing with tubes. You just get a larger hook with a, I don't much care for the horizontals. I would prefer to eventually switch this to a vertical. A lot less scope when it's going down, especially in the deeper water. I don't do a lot of trolling, but if you were going to troll, it is sometimes better to have a vertical end on your tube jigs. But you can pretty much do the same thing, just grab a 3/0 jig hook. I think Daiichi makes them, Mustad makes them, even these guys. I think MFC has a couple. But you're ideally looking for a long shank like this, but you want to have the eye be completely vertical, away from the shank, 90 degrees away from the shank. If you can find them, get 60 degrees, because those tend to not helicopter as much when you're dropping down or when you're pulling back up. Again, line twist, everything plays into that a big amount. But with these, I've noticed, these are 90 degree. No, these are 72.5 degree vertical eye jigs. So these hooks, they tend to helicopter a little bit, but again, the shape and the size of the weight is going to play a big factor in that as well. As you saw with the lighter gauge that I use right here, the round ball is actually better than the teardrop because the weight profile, it's going to make it sink vertically instead of it having that teardrop where it's going to kind of throw some water and it's going to want a helicopter on its way down. Half ounce, you're not really going to deal with too much helicoptering because, again, it's too much weight to compensate for the drag of the plastic on here and also the drag of the head. So half ounce, maybe 3/8 ounce if you're lucky. It all depends on how far back you tie it on there too. You really want to choke the teardrop as close as you can to that bait, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a lot more drag. You're going to have a gap in between, and that gap is going to cause a little bit of helicoptering. I have noticed that with tying my own. So keep that in mind. I'll show you this one. That's still on my ice fishing setup, but that's the jig that I was using that slayed them for the last couple of days of the ice fishing season here. Again, using one of the bend it baits because I was fishing deeper water. So those glow jigs really make a difference when you're down past 70 feet. Just try everything in the book. I mean, from fluorescent floss or thread, fluorescence, you got your orange, your chartreuse, even limes. Try different things. Like, I'll even go as far as like a hot pink. Just that little hot spot that differs from the actual bait. Sometimes it's enough for them to key in on it, but if your bait's glowing and your hot spot is a different color, I have noticed some bigger trout are already wised up to that. So it's like having a chartreuse bucktail with blood red thread. You know what I mean? They're going to key in on that and notice, hey, something's up because this has two different colors. So if you're using chartreuse, either stick with that chartreuse, or if you're in a place that's not so heavily targeted and pressured all year, maybe you can get away with like a hot pink or something like that, just to kind of give it a little bit more pop while it's down in deep water. The other thing that I've noticed is like flashy metallic threads and tinsels and stuff that you can put around it. More for like if you're fishing 40 feet or less, because after about 50 feet, you're not getting as much light to that. And with it being such a small profile, you'd literally have to cover the entire shank of the hook to even get more flash that deep. And at that point, you're better off just using a spoon, because the spoon is going to be a much broader profile. It's going to have a little bit of curvature to it naturally, not just a round hook shank with like a slim little sliver of flashing light. You're going to get a lot better reception from just dropping a spoon at that point, or even a blade bait. Blade baits having that real shine to them. That's a lot better than, say, this size of a hook shank that has some flashy thread wrapped around it. Again, it all depends what you guys do for fishing, but something to keep in mind, especially if you're going after rainbows with some of these hooks that you're going to be tying up. I have vertically jigged for rainbows out of deep water, especially in the middle of the summer, because sometimes they don't like to be up in that warmer water, especially some of our ponds. They get upwards around 70, 72 degrees during the summer, the middle part of the summer. So a lot of our trout ponds, they're deeper, so those trout have a place to escape, and then you get a lot less die-off, a lot less diseases, a lot less fauna and algae buildup, which could cause potential problems, choking out the life cycles and blah, 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 blah. But the big thing to keep in mind is the flashier that you get, it's almost kind of throwing it in their face that you're throwing a jig down there. Typically, bait themselves aren't too flashy where they hang out down with lake trout. They do glisten, but like very, very minimal. The amount of light that's coming down there versus if they're up in 30 feet of water in the dead of winter, you got no snow on the ice and it's just beaming bluebird sky. So think about that. Like some places where people do catch smelt, use them for bait. They don't want to buy them or they can't afford to buy them. So they go and they, I'll tie on a little size 22 copper john, and that works too. Little nymphs, anything small. If you're in the fly fishing game, anything small like 20 and less. So 20, 22, 24, 30, 32, if you really need to, depending on the size of your baits. Like Winnipesaukee, I would use probably a 30, 32. If you could find them, 28. But even a 28, it's going to be hard for most of those pin smelt to choke it in. So they're really just going to be grabbing onto it. And if you don't get that sideways hook set in them, you're not going to catch them. You'll pull them right up to the hole and then they'll pop right off. All it takes is for them to open their mouth. But I've noticed in places, where there's bigger smelt, you can get away with something as big as a 20, even size 18. And I wouldn't even use a size 18 on them because most of the smelt that I'm going after, I'm going to be mimicking whatever's in the trout's belly. So if they're not on jack smelts, I'm not going to be going out there with a 14 hook trying to catch an 8-inch jack smelt or big suckers. So keep that in mind if you're really keened in on what they're eating at the moment, and this fluctuates all throughout the winter season and all throughout the summer season. Sometimes they're on bigger baits, sometimes they're just eating yellow perch, sometimes they're eating cusks, sometimes they're eating fall fish, anything. So they might be on those bigger profiles at times. Just really do your research and make sure that what you're throwing down there is something that they're going to look at and be like, hey, that's not sticking out too much from the bait. You do want to stick out. Obviously, you're not going to be the only one in a million that they're going to target every single time that they come in. I mean, especially when you're closer to the bait piles, they're always going to choose that fresh bait because that's live, it's kicking, it stinks, it looks natural, it acts natural. So a lot of those big things, if you really want to kind of differ from the normal fishing approach, everybody uses spoons and tubes and swim baits and stuff like that. If you really want to kind of set yourself aside from some of that stuff, I mean, tie a minnow pattern with marabou. I mean, even straight buck hair, any sort of fish pattern where when you get that nice drag on it, it's a slim profile so that it looks like those bait that are in the lake. So Winnipesaukee, I would even tie less buck hair on that because, as you see, it's a pretty dense coat, but that's about what it's going to look like when it's about 20-ish feet down. And obviously, I fish with sinking line on my fly rods when I'm really deep dredging for lakers or salmon or anything like that. So even salmon, if you're trying to target them and you're an avid fly fisherman, you would know that this is a little bit too big. Proper presentation, it's the right thickness, the right density, so that it covers that hook shank really, really well. But at the same time, if it's just bigger than the bait that they're eating, they're going to look at this, they're going to get right up close to it, and then they're going to nose away because it's not the right profile. Or they won't even give you that much. They'll just give you the fin. So definitely kind of play around with it and see, what size hooks are better for the plastics that you're using, what size hooks are going to hide the size of bait that's, being used. Because I don't just use my tied up jigs for soft plastics like this. I will throw a live smelt or a dead smelt, and I'll cut the head off of a dead smelt, and I'll just throw it on there like as if it's a soft plastic. And as I'm vertically jigging away from them, because of the wait and run technique, when they start coming up off the bottom and you start taking off, with a dead smelt, it's a lot easier to kind of get them to stay on it if you put a little bit of life into it, as if, it was still alive. Because obviously dead smelt on a jig head, it's going to want a helicopter, it's going to want to do all sorts of things. So having that little bit of play to it is going to make it dart off and act a little bit more natural. You can do the same thing with swim baits. Typically, like, if say your hook is too long, sometimes your tails won't kick as nicely. Like, this is a perfect setup right here because it's about half the body length, and then I have the other half to really kick that tail around, and you see how wiggly it is. That's what you want. You want that thing to be heart beating the entire time, because that's sending out vibrations to the fish that's chasing you, acting like natural bait. They create low frequencies when they swim. So those fish are really targeted in on that action. And when you have a dead smelt, there's no paddle to kind of kick. So you have to imitate that kick with a little bit of finesse, is really what it comes down to. And again, like I said, sometimes flashy is not the ideal way to go. You could still use like hotspot colors like gold, or this is like a beige flat color. It's got a little bit of gloss to it, but that kind of goes away when you put the bait on it. It looks very flat, matte finish. But you can go just straight black, because those black nickel hooks will really, really hide that thread. And the only thing that's going to stick out off of that bait that you have on that hook is the tungsten head. They will target that tungsten head. I've had trout hit split shot sinkers. I've had them hit my tungsten drop shots just on a Carolina rig. I've had fish go after weights more often than anything else. So sometimes having that silvery flash on the front of it, but hiding the rest of the hook, the actual part that you're utilizing to catch that fish, that can go a long ways with your presentation. So sometimes, just going straight tungsten to, a steel color or a high carbon steel color like this, stainless color, you can't really hide the black thread like that. So in that case, you would want to use something a little bit flashier. Because if you're using stuff like stainless steel hooks, like saltwater hooks that are chromed, it just means that they're not finicky. They're not really, really dialed in, looking for hooks. They're not, heavily pressured, that kind of thing. So you might get lucky enough to be able to use chromed hooks. But I try to stay away from the chrome hooks, especially when I'm fishing for trout. Try to stay away from gold hooks, bronze hooks, anything that kind of stands out from the presentation that I'm trying to do. Like if I'm doing a solid black fly, I'm not going to go with a bronze or a gold hook or a silver hook, because they're going to see that. They're going to see that flash of that color, and it's going to very, very much stand out from that black solid silhouette that they're keying in on. Which they're going to see that silhouette before they see the hook, but the closer that they get to the hook, that's when they start really picking up on, like, oh, the color of the thread, or, the color of the hook. You can get away with, like, Mustad's or Eagle Claw's dyed red hooks. Those are pretty good. Again, water clarity comes down to it at the end of the day. And again, I don't think that they make any vertical jig hooks. So if that's what you're in for, and you're you're trying to, go for like a basic middle ground hook, especially on price, just do your research, because there's much, much, much more in the world of fish hooks and products that you can delve into, and it's a rabbit hole, man. You're gonna find everybody, and some companies that might sell decent products aren't gonna always sell the best terminal tackle. So keep that in mind if you're going with, like, again, Eagle Claw or Mustad. A lot of the times what they do is they're going to cheap out on the gear, not necessarily like the reel and the rod, but they're going to cheap out on line. They're going to cheap out on hooks. They're going to cheap out on weights. And again, do your research before you buy these tungsten jig heads, or drop shot weights. I'm sorry. Because these drop shot weights, that gauge of wire that hangs out of the end of them varies every different company. And the ones that I bought, I get them out of Kittery Trading Post up in Maine, but you can find them basically anywhere. I can also get them out of places like Walmart if they sell tungsten. But Bass Pro carries all of the different kinds of tungsten drop shots. I use them for squid fishing in the summertime when I'm in the ocean. I can put that down. It's a much smaller profile, so they don't key in on it as much. Especially squid fishing, they will key in on your weight and not even look at your bait. Because again, that artificial lure only does so much if you're not giving it life. Squid are very, very much like trout, where they can see that thing from a mile away. If you can't see it in the water, they still can. So if you're dropping down 25 feet and you lose sight of your jig, they can probably still see that thing for another 10, maybe 12, even 15 feet, depending on water clarity. So keep that in mind. They're probably seeing that thing from 40 feet away. And that's the big difference, and that's kind of what got me into this. And this is why I felt so inclined to share this information. Presentation. Presentation makes all the difference. That smaller weight for squid, or just hiding your hook better for trout. Not even just lake trout, but just trout in general. I know a lot of spin rod guys that they go, man, I just can't seem to get them to commit, but I get a lot of chases. Specifically with rainbow trout. Rainbow trout have seen every type of spinner, spoon, flutters, you name it. Even bucktails, bullet weight jigs, everything. So when you're spin rodding, you kind of have to take a key from fly rod fishing, fly fishing, where you're really trying to mimic nature. Get rid of all the abnormalities and you'll do a lot better. My hookup ratio was at least, I would even go as far as to say 300 times better this year. And I only just started on Lakers 2 years ago. And I had one on the board until the last 2 days of ice fishing this season. And I didn't fish at all for 2025. My last lake trout was in 2024, 2024 to 2025 ice fishing season. So it kind of, it varied a lot for me. And obviously trips make the difference too. If you can't get out a whole lot, you're not going to have a whole lot of success unless you really, really get lucky and you get those great days where pressure is right, conditions are right, and also water temperature. So especially in the wintertime, when everybody's in layoff seasons and stuff like that, go as often as you can. Pick the best conditions that you can fish in. And by that, I mean, don't always go on those bluebird sunny days. Try to get out there when you have a storm front pushing in, and try to fish the front hours or the trailing hours. Some people give up as soon as the rain goes, overhead. They go home, they unpack, and they're done. Don't be that guy. Sometimes those fish will fire right back up as soon as that storm has already progressed and is on the north side or the south side, whichever way it's pushing. Once it gets to the other side of the lake and that pressure is starting to relieve again, fish those first couple hours of the relieving pressure, that downward pressure, because not always is the rising pressure going to be better, and not always is the lowering pressure, the dropping pressure, going to be better. So try to fish in between, and really kind of fiddle around with it a little bit and see what you can come up with. Every area is going to be different, especially, if that body of water has plentiful amounts of bait. They're going to be really, really keyed on natural stuff. If it's dwindling on like keeping up with bait, they're going to start targeting other things like yellow perch or sunfish or, bigger, just bigger bait in general. Like, you can't, in New Hampshire, you can't fish with spiny backfish like perch and sunfish, but you can fish with the other bait fish that we have, like fall fish, suckers, and yada da 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 da. But sometimes they will key in on those bigger fish, and the ticket is something like this, where you can mimic any sort of bait. I've tied yellow perch flies just so that I can troll along with them, and I've caught as big as 18-inch, 20-inch rainbows on yellow perch flies, because those bigger fish are not going to be chasing these little tiny pin smelt. They're going to want the most amount of calories for the least amount of work. They're very opportunistic, but they're going to be lazy sometimes. Try to stand out. Try to be that bait that is just all by itself, confused, easy pickings. But also, if you're targeting bigger fish, try to stay around even for browns, brown trout, river fishing. Go as far as a mouse, a little tiny mouse fly, something that sits on the water at nighttime is the best time I use mice. Let it sit on the top, give it a little bit of life. The surface bites are going to be on, because you're mimicking that bigger bait that the big trout come out for at night, because it's a lot of calories for very, very minimal effort. Usually, like a mouse in the water is not going to swim very fast. So if you're ripping that thing across the surface, you're going to get a lot less bites because it doesn't look right. But if you're kind of just twitching it, making it look like it's kicking, yeah, you're going to catch any size fish, from little 6-inch native trout to a freaking 36-inch trout. It all depends on, what you're fishing. But I've caught little tiny brook trout, fresh stock brook trout on some of my biggest and ugliest flies, like flies that they should not be going after. But obviously stock trout are going to be a little bit more opportunistic. They don't really, until they've established in that body of water for a few weeks or even a month at times, they get pressured, they get hooked a bunch. They will start wising up to stuff like that, but again, your presentation makes all the difference. You could be that guy that's out there using a cheap Walmart sunfish bait and flinging it around, 6-inch sunfish bait, and then this guy comes out with his fly tying arsenal and he has a little 2-inch sunfish bait, but it's, hand tied. It's not a store-bought one. He might hook up 1,000 times more than you. And it's not because of luck, it's not because of skill, it's because of knowledge. Having knowledge of what you're using and the right propagation, proportions, even just the right area. I'm not going to fish a 6-inch bait in a small little stream. I'm going to fish a 6-inch bait in places like Sebago, because Sebago has 6-inch baits, I'm not going to use an 8-inch bait or a 6-inch bait in Winnipesaukee because they're not always going to be on 6-inch baits. They might actually be targeting those little tiny 1.5 inch, pin smelts, those little rainbow smelt. So again, without beating a dead horse, try it. Again, not necessarily cost effective, but try it. If all else fails, there's nothing wrong with trying a new experiment, or, come up with your own ideas. Try bismuth. I don't know, if you make your own lead weights, you have a cast and a die and a crucible and a furnace at home, go for it. Go for it. Cast all your own stuff, because in the end, that'll be cheaper. You already have all the waste scrap. You have the hooks. You have the gear. That would be ideal. You don't have to go out and spend $1,000 so that you can get started. And again, I use high quality, Both my dad and I use high quality fly tying vices. You don't need that. You can get one for $80. These are a little bit more pricey. My dad's is actually the next step up from mine. It's about $400. Mine is about $280, so around that $300 price range. You don't need that. Just something that works well, and something that you have the versatility of going from a size 30 hook to, say, like a 1/0, anything up to like a decent size hook. You're not going to tie, every single size hook that they make on one vise. I fully understand that. If you do your research, you will find out not every vise can handle certain size hooks. I like long nose, almost like needle nose plier vices, because then you can have that different depth. I can go from, depending on the thickness of the nose or the beak of your vise, I can go down as far as like a 26, I believe, but I can do all the way up to a 7/0 hook. So having that versatility really matters, not just for what I'm explaining to you guys, but for everything else. I mean, I do everything with these vices, from repairing bucktails to, tying a little bit of flashy stuff to, say, a spoon or a Swedish pimple. Just anything, even crappy jigs. Sometimes, actually, for example, I have some of these other styles. These are much smaller. These are the size 12 vertical jig hooks, but they have a small tungsten bead. These are more like my smaller panfish, bass kind of stuff. I'm only fishing in about 15, 25 feet of water. You don't need any more than an 1/8 ounce, or this is 3/16 ounce. But I've gone as far as changing the profile of that, having the plastic on the back end of it, but changing the profile of just having that normal, bead tied up into the front of it. Add a little bit of different stuff to it. I put a bronze bullet sinker in the middle of that. It's another bead, so this one has 2 beads on it, and then also some lead-free wire that I just wrapped around the shank to kind of give it that bulk, so those beads don't move around too much. Also, UV cement the crap out of them, because if the fish do have big teeth, they are going to mess that thread up. Give that thread a chance to be as durable as possible. I start my thread wraps in UV resin, and I finish my thread wraps in UV resin and coat the top of that again. But also, you can add stuff like chenille, or this is ice dubbing, that bloody ice dubbing. So, this for flies mimics, injured bait fish. So if I'm tying stuff like this, I can tie even darker red blood ice dubbing to that, and it mimics fish that have already been struck. So I can tie that fly to mimic a falling, fluttering bait fish and put all that bloody ice dubbing on there, and then it's kind of game over at that point. The trout see that and they go, ooh, easy pickings. So, again, this is on a size 12. Your hook sizes are all going to vary, especially depending on where you get them, who makes them, what their intended purpose is. But again, another good example, this is an 1/8 ounce tungsten teardrop weight that I tied to the front of this one. This is a size 10 hook. It's got that bloody ice dubbing, and then I also added some marabou to the end of it. Marabou is just really, really fluffy feathers. I wouldn't get any of my stuff out of a craft store, but if you really want to stay cheap about it, get stuff out of the craft store. It's all the same. But make sure that what you're getting isn't just overly done. Like, you're not getting 1/2 inch, feather quills and stuff like that. You want it to be the same fineness. Like, these are just arts and crafts feathers, but they're not very thick. This is more of a marabou style towards the back, but the head is very, very tight feathers. Those little barbules, they'll be more dense like that, you know. But stuff like this that's actually made for fly tying is going to be very, very expensive. This is like probably around $25 for a bag like this that you can't even get anymore in our state. You're going to end up with like 8 or 10 feathers of wood duck, and it's going to be like $9 because that's how crazy expensive this stuff is. I mean, a bag like this nowadays is almost irresponsible to buy, but you buy them in bulk when they're in cheap, and later on you don't have to worry about stuff like that. But again, like, these are craft marabou. Craft marabou is just a basic fluffy feather. They make specific marabous for fly tying. Again, you're just going to pay more. It's the same exact thing. You're just going to pay more. How you use the feathers is totally different. Again, I'm going to ramble forever if I don't stop. So that's my little keyed in advice for you. It worked well for me. Give it a shot. Definitely experiment with it and really try to figure some stuff that I haven't out. You know, take it to ponds that I haven't tried. Let me know how it does in places like Canada, because that smaller presentation, you can't beat it, man. Especially when you're trying to go for 30+ inch lake trout. A lot of those guys that fish those and catch those regularly, like Clayton Schick on YouTube, go check him out. He catches huge lake trout, 44+ inches. But he's up in Manitoba, Canada, so they have those lake trout. We don't have a whole lot of them. Yes, we do have them, but they're not as prevalent. They're not going to be as common. But I would love to see somebody like him try out my jig style of just mashing 2 store-bought things together with some thread and some glue and see how he does on stuff like that, because I'm hooking 30-inch trout on these and I can't bend them at all. So let me know if a 40-inch trout can bend them out, because if that's the case, I might switch to a size 8. But again, it's not cost effective. So if you're not into this kind of stuff, just keep buying what you're buying, because you're going to save a lot more in the end. These threads can be anywhere of $12 a spool, $15, $20 a spool. I've paid as much as $32 for a fucking spool. Pardon my French. But fly tying specific stuff is going to be real expensive, and I'm not going to use normal, clothing sewing fabric thread. It's not going to be the same. It's going to sit way higher up on your hook, especially for stuff like when you're fly tying. Really trying to get those fly profiles down, like stuff that's really, 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 really small. You really, 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 really want to get that profile down as nicely as you can, and try to get them as thin as possible, because the bugs themselves aren't going to be all janky and wonky. They're going to be perfect, almost perfect all the way across. They're more symmetrical than humans, put it that way. But let me know. Let me know how any of you do. I would love to see videos, responses, anything. Even leave information down in the comments. I would love to hear back about it. But thank you guys, and I'll update you on the next thing that I find out.